Hey everyone, this is Brian Kelly from Association Mavens, where you get direct access to some of the foremost thinkers and teachers in the association industry. My guest today is Jeff Hurt. Jeff is the Executive Vice President of Education and Engagement at Velvet Chainsaw Consulting and has worked in the events and nonprofit arena for more than 20 years. I personally like to think of Jeff as a ninja warrior for education and learning. So welcome to Association Mavens, Jeff.
I feel like I should go, hi-ya!
Well, Jeff, I appreciate you coming here today. I wanted to talk about a blog post that you wrote earlier this year about using brain science so education sticks. And it's also a presentation that you did earlier this year at the ASAE annual conference. So to get things started off, I wanted to see if you could explain this concept of using a presenter-attendee agreement at the start of every educational session. Like what's the reason for it and what's it all about?
The presenter-attendee agreement has several factors in it that work to both the presenter's benefit as well as the attendee benefit. And I think it just helps for attendees to know what's expected of them during a presentation, as well as a presenter to state what he or she feels is expected of them during a presentation. And it puts everybody on an even playing field. It also gives the audience the freedom to take care of their own needs, and if they don't feel like they have to live under the old kind of unwritten guard or rules that were, you come into a presentation, you sit quietly, keep your mouth shut, don't fidget around, keep your eyes on the speaker, and you don't get up and leave the room. That's the old guard. The presenter-attendee agreement gives people the freedom to take care of their needs. It also helps establish a ground for everybody, and I think it creates a safe space for attendees, and they feel more comfortable when they know what's expected and what they can expect from the presenter.
Well, I actually had the opportunity to use this in a presentation I did recently, and as part of the presenter-attendee agreement, letting people know that if at any time during this session that it doesn't meet your needs, feel free to get up and leave. It won't offend me. And about 10 minutes into the presentation, somebody in the back of the room got up and started leaving and glanced my way with just a little smile on their face, and it was hilarious. So, but no, I think it's definitely a good thing for people to feel comfortable that, hey, if I've got something else that's more important or pressing, or the content of this session maybe just doesn't match up with what I'm needing, there's no problem at all with that. So.
Yeah, it really lets them know that the presentation is about them. It's not about you as a speaker or presenter, but it really is for and about the audience.
Yep, perfect. Okay, so let's talk about why is it important to establish learning outcomes during an educational session, which I think a lot of times people will start off with an agenda, but that's not what this is. This is talking about what are you going to get out of it, and so why would you say that something like that's important?
Well, learning outcomes actually comes from the education profession, and this is something that every teacher does when they're designing basically their lesson plans. They have to put in the learning outcomes, and the learning outcomes are action statements of what the learner or the attendee or the participant will be able to do at the end of the presentation. This also really establishes what you're going to cover. It's kind of your agreement with the audience that here's what you should be able to do if I do my job well as a presenter by the time I leave. The other thing that it does, and what I do with the learner outcomes, is once I put them up and say, this is the parameters of what we're going to talk about. If this is not what you're here for, you may want to go to another session, or you may want to skip out. But figure out which one of these learner outcomes, and I always have 3, most resonates with you, or are you most interested in, or would you really like to learn more about? And what you're doing is telling the brain to really look out for that information. And it's a great step and a great little trick to do in presentations, because what the brain does, the brain hears, looks at that particular learning outcome that they choose and says, okay, let's watch for this information. And it actually puts some chemical on that information, on that piece, that learner outcome, a couple of the words in it, and it's kind of like a sticky note that says, look out for this when it's coming. And it's a great way to help people retain information, because when that information does come along, the brain goes, ah, this is what we've been waiting for. Right. And it builds neurons and a pathway between neurons that are thicker and stronger because you actually pulled it out previously and said, I want to learn more about this.
Yeah, it's a simple but effective tool. It sets the expectations, and like you said, it gives people the opportunity to realize, hey, I'm interested in this. I'm going to really make sure I'm paying attention for whatever the information is about this particular area.
Yep, and it does it subconsciously, whether we realize it or not. And that's a great thing about it. I also like to say, audience, this is my agreement with you. This is what we're going to cover. And if I do my job well, by the end of this presentation, you should be able to do the following things. Learner outcomes always use measurable verbs, in active verbs, and then something that's measurable, because you should theoretically be able to test 2 weeks from the presentation date. Did you actually learn, or can you remember blah, 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 blah from this presentation?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about some bigger concepts. I want you to describe the difference between three things. The first is information.
Okay.
Next is education.
Okay.
And then there's learning. What are these three areas, and why do we need to understand the differences between the three of these things?
Well, most presentations today are full of information. They're what in the education world we call information transfer. It's like me literally handing out a report to you. And the research shows from some of the neuroscientists, cognitive psychologists, and also education researchers that a straight lecture, those things we had from our professors in college, is the equivalent of handing a report to somebody, because it's information transfer. It's from my mouth to the listener's ear. Doesn't mean it's going to go into the brain or it's going to be retained. Information is data, facts, figures, opinions. It's just that kind of stuff. And that kind of stuff doesn't persuade us to do anything differently. It's the story behind the data, facts, figures, and opinions, and it's the images that our mind conjures up that actually persuade us. So most presentations are nothing more than information, and you might as well hand out a printed report or give them a link to an online report, because that's what the equivalent of that type of presentation is. Education is about a process. A lot of times people think that presentations create a product. Well, they really don't. They help in the learning process. And education is about, problem-solving skills, analysis, decision-making, judgment, estimation. It's about some of the action involved in the learning process. And I would submit that what most people want to actually occur in presentations is learning. Now, they may say, but I'm doing a sales presentation, or I'm doing a presentation to persuade why my service and product is the right one to go with. I don't want them to learn that. And I would argue that memory is the residue of learning. So if you want them to remember your presentation, you really want them to learn it. And learning is a biological, cellular process on the very basic level. It's something that happens in our brain that is chemical, it's electrical, and biological. And we can't force learning to happen. Learning occurs when the listener actually gives meaning to information. So they first of all have to make meaning of it, have to make sense of it, how it fits with them, how it fits in their world. And then they have to connect it to their own experiences and their own information. Well, that takes time, number one. And number two, it means they have to be given the ability to think. And you can't give full attention to thinking and listening at the same time. You give full attention to either listening or you give full attention to thinking. We've all been in a presentation where we scribble down notes really fast and we're writing it down, and then we look up and we can't remember what the presenter said. We got behind. And we look at somebody and say, what did he say? What did she say? And because we can't think and listen at the same time. So it's really critical in presentations. If learning is the goal, if you want them to remember what you're presenting, then you've got to give them time to think. And that means you got to cut your content back. It means you got to quit talking. and allow them to process it either through reflection, through thinking about it privately, and then possibly thinking about it with another colleague, one-on-one with a peer, and discussing it, how it impacts them, or raising questions that they may have about it.
Well, I think about, at least in my own personal experience, throughout high school or college, and even just, attending other educational sessions, the experiences that I had where I walked away with something that really excited me or, made me think, wow, that teacher was one of the best teachers I had, was because they used, maybe intuitively or not, a lot of these concepts where it was about the learning that made me personally retain the information and process it through my own experiences and really become excited about it, or be able to retain the information years down the road. So I think that that's an important distinction that I want to make sure everybody has the opportunity to understand, that you've got information on one end, education, but learning, if you really want people to learn the information that you're conveying, using some of these techniques is essential.
Yep.
So you talked a little bit about learning being biological, electrical, chemical, all that good stuff. I want to have you talk about what is the neuroscience research that you're referencing? Like, where is it coming from? Who are some of the people, that have, I guess, extended these ideas and where you've been inspired to share?
Sure. I would say that neuroscience for the past 10, 15 years has really impacted the education field. We know more about the brain now than we did in my lifetime. We know more about what works in the brain and what doesn't work in the brain. There are a lot of cognitive psychologists and neuroscientists out there researching the brain. And it's actually one of the top fields right now for people that are graduating out of college to go into. It's such a burgeoning field, and we're only going to learn more down the road. Some of the people that I look to for ideas and information and the research is Dr. John Medina, who wrote the book Brain Rules. He's a professor at Seattle University. Dr. Daniel Willingham, which is a cognitive psychologist. I believe he's at Virginia Tech. Dr. Ruth Colvin Clark. She's written some great books, one called Evidence-Based Training, that is based on scientific evidence on what works in presentations and what doesn't. I really like that. In the health field, we have evidence-based health, so why can't we have evidence-based education? And another great place to look at is called the Neuro Institute of Leadership. And the Neuro Leadership Institute, let me rephrase that, Neuro Leadership Institute. And it is an association of neuroscientists, and they collaborate several times a year on all the research that they've been gathering. And there's great practical information that comes out from the Neuro Leadership Institute. They do an annual summit. I think they have like 800 people who go to that summit, and their whole conferences are now based on how we learn and the scientific evidence from neuroscience and cognitive psychology. Their conferences are very different than most traditional conferences, and it's worth checking out. Just go to their website and peruse some of the free information they've got. Excellent.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Okay, so I would love the opportunity to explore some of these brain-friendly strategies that I've heard you speak about. As also I've read some of the information. There's 8, and I think you've even said there's more. There's way more beyond 8. But
yep.
Let's just focus on a few. So I kind of pulled out some that interest me personally, and would love to have you talk a little bit more on exactly what they mean. So the first one is talking trumps listening. And this is giving people the opportunity to internalize the information. As you mentioned earlier, you kind of want to cut down your content, present nuggets of information, and then let the audience participants discuss those concepts. Can you explain that a bit further and why this is an important principle?
Sure. If the presentation is about the audience, and it is for the audience, and your goal is for them to retain some of your information, then you need to let them think about your information, think about your content, think about what you're presenting to them, and you need to let them talk about it. The rule of thumb is the person who retains the most, who learns the most, talks the most. Well, typically that's the presenter. So you cut your content back, and you intentionally provide places within the presentation where the audience thinks and reflects, maybe independently first, and then move to discussion. One-on-one is the best. The smaller you can get these groups talking, the better off everybody is, because it gives each person a chance to talk. When you're in a group of 1 to 10, well, you're having to take turns. And while one person's talking, 9 people are listening. So you want to think about it on 1 to 1, 1 to 2, 1 to 3, worst case scenario, 1 to 6. And when you talk about the information, you're actually processing what your brain is thinking. And you hear yourself saying it out loud. We've all had the experience where we've said something to somebody and we go, oh, stop, that was wrong, rewind, let me scratch that, forget I ever said that, because we've heard ourselves make the mistake. We've also all done the thing of going up to a coworker or a friend and saying, can I have 5 minutes of your time? I'm struggling with this dilemma and I could use some feedback. And you start to talk to them, you spend the entire 5 minutes talking to them, and you talk yourself right into a solution. You look at them and go, you're great. Thank you so much for helping me. You helped me solve my problem. And the other person just kind of smiles and shakes their head, and internally they're thinking, I didn't do anything. I just listened. And so we process information out loud. And it's interesting because when I teach this workshop, there's a couple activities that I do that if people are processing out loud, even privately, individually, they actually can get to the solution quicker than if they're just thinking about it. So talking trumps listening. Talking provides feedback, which is critical in learning. And when you're listening to somebody the entire time, you're not getting any feedback if you do stop to think about it on whether your thought process is right. But Brian, if you and I are talking to each other and I make a strange face like, what? You immediately know, okay, this isn't resonating, or I'm not making sense. I need to restate this, or I need to rethink it. And feedback is really critical for learning. So talking gives you feedback. Talking builds community. Talking just resonates with other people and helps us process information. So what should be happening in presentations is they shouldn't be silent rooms. There should be this buzz of energy going on in that room, at least half of the presentation, where the audience is doing the talking.
Got it. Okay, so the next one is different trumps same. And when I heard you talk about this principle or strategy, you talked about the story of driving, and also being able to use techniques such as storytelling and visuals. So can you expand a little bit on what this means, different trumping same?
Sure. The brain really doesn't like to work, and thinking is work. It expends resources, it expends energy. That's why if you're in a problem-solving mode and you spend a considerable amount of time of a day trying to problem solve something, by the end of the day your brain hurts. You're physically tired. Yeah. And the brain likes to conserve its resources. So when there's something going on that you repeat over and over and over again, the brain goes into automation. And it says, been there, done that. I can reserve attention for something else, and we can go into automation mode, and I can just get this done. You may have a routine when you get up every morning that you do, and you do it in a specific way, a specific behavior, and your brain goes into automation. The example I use a lot is I work out of house now. The last office I used to work in was about 15 miles from my house. It took 20 minutes to get there in the mornings because I was going opposite traffic. But to get home in the evenings or mid-afternoon, it would take me an hour and a half because of traffic. And I would pull up in my driveway sometime, and I would go to take the keys out of the car, and I would go, I don't remember driving home. How did I get here? Because I'd taken the same route so many times, so often, the brain would go into automation. Now, that's not good for drivers. Right. That wasn't good for everybody else out there. But the brain, if it's something that's repetitive or seems the same or feels the same, like we've been there, done that, the brain doesn't give it much attention. However, when I would drive home and I would pull up into my neighborhood and my neighbor down the street had finally mowed the lawn and landscaped, my brain would go, ah, different, and would give lots of attention to it. So when you're doing presentations, and this is really critical for anybody doing sales presentations, if you're responding to an RFP and you've gotten the approval to come in and do a presentation and you're one of 10, your presentation has to be so different that they remember it. I was with a client yesterday, actually, a big corporation, and I had a room full of people, and they were talking about how they do these sales presentations all the time, and maybe 1 in 5, and their potential customers will say to them, we really like you, but you know what? You're just like the other 4 presentations. So we don't know why we should go with you. It was no different. So different trumps the same. And it means your presentation has to involve personal stories, storytelling, has to look different, has to have novelty, has to have different images in it. Get rid of those branded templates. They suck. And if your company's forcing you to do that, put the brand at the beginning and the brand at the end, and maybe one in the middle to, make them happy, make the rest of it different. Because if it's the same look on every slide, and you only have a third of the page to do something with, the mind checks out.
Yep.
So that's why different trumps same, and that's why you really need to start thinking about, how can I be different? You don't want to create gags for gag's sake, but you want to be different.
Exactly. Well, this next one and the final one I want to discuss with you dovetails nicely with the notion of different trumping the same. So images trump words. A lot of us are obviously very familiar with what's called death by bullets. And I've heard you talk about that the brain, or rather 80% of our brain power is dedicated to processing visuals.
Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about why images are so much more important than words, and ways that we might be able to leverage this idea in our presentations?
Well, the brain thinks in pictures. It's just the way our brain works and operates. And I have people all the time who will disagree with me, and they'll say, well, I'm an auditory learner, I'm not a visual learner. And I will go, that's old research, and the evidence proves otherwise. The scientific evidence today says we are all visual learners. You don't think in words. Case in point, you don't dream in words. You dream in pictures.
Yep.
And ever since I've started saying that, I have these nightmares sometimes that these words are just going to start attacking me, but it's still visual images of words attacking me,
Right.
And so our brain is really dedicated, and it gets hooked on images. And, death by PowerPoint, I say it's not really PowerPoint that kills people, it's the abuse of it and the misuse of it. And our brain actually looks at, when you're reading words, it looks at each individual letter as an image. This is why when we first start to read, it's not that easy. And it takes lots of practice, lots of rote memorization, and then our brain goes into automation, back to what we talked to earlier, because it recognizes a group of letters together as a specific word after so long of practice and rote memorization.
Right.
But the brain really likes, if I were to hold up the word pears, P-E-A-R-S, and it was just black font on a white background, and then I were to hold up 2 pears, the brain likes that images more than anything. And when I say the word dog, everybody automatically has a different image of the word dog. They don't think of D-O-G, they think of this picture that comes to their mind.
Yep.
And so our presentations, it's critical. If you are delivering a presentation and you are not using visuals, you have created a barrier for all of your audience. So therefore, your words, your auditory words, have to create visual images in their mind. And if you're talking about a foreign concept and not using analogies or stories to help them hook onto it, they won't get it. But if you put up pictures with it, and you put up some unique, novel images, or some images that help with analogies, they'll remember those pictures faster than they'll remember the words that you're saying. So it's really critical to think about the visual images that you can be using in your presentations.
So what would you say for those of us out there that would be like, Jeff, this sounds great, it makes sense, but I'm not a designer. How can I go about using images better if I don't really understand how to use images? Do you have any suggestions?
Sure. You need to practice at it, and you need to get better at it. We all need to get better at design. Design is one of those skills that we all are going to need more we go into the 21st century. It's just what it is. And, so I would suggest starting with maybe Gar Reynolds, a great author, The Zen of Presentations. You might think about Nancy Duarte, another great author who has a book called Resonate, and I forgot the name of her other book. I've got Slideology.
Slideology, yeah.
That help you understand how to go about designing, the visuals on your screen. And there are other people out there that could really, you can read on their blog and you can start looking at how do you put images on a screen so it connects well. It has a lot to do with white space. White space attracts the eye, focuses it on something, and you don't want tons of images. Go with one. Go with one big one and make it large, and then just put a few words on it to help connect. But this is an area that everybody could improve and get better at. And we just need to get better at it if we're going to be doing presentations today. You can pay people to do your graphics for you. There's some great designers out there. Another thing I would suggest is go to slideshare.net. Go look and see what the top slide presentations are, PowerPoint presentations are for the day. It ranks them. And you'll see some phenomenal presentations out there and how they've used PowerPoint and visuals. Start copying them. Look at what they're doing. And look also, if you're looking for color combinations, pick up some magazines like People and look and see what they do for color combinations for a background and the color of a font. And start copying those colors. Glee is great at this. Glee has great, when they break out of commercial and it just shows the word Glee, you'll see these strange colors of Glee with strange color backgrounds. They're really good at giving you some cues on what the eye likes. Copy them. Copy those kind of color combinations for fonts and then images. So start there, start somewhere, just start learning about it.
Great. Well, Jeff, thank you for doing this interview, and thanks to everybody for watching. Be sure to sign up today in the upper right corner of this website to be updated via email when new interviews are posted. Also, follow @BrianKellyNow on Twitter to stay on top of all things Association Mavens related. Lastly, please submit your recommendation for which Association Maven you'd like to see interviewed next. Thanks again for watching, and I look forward to bringing you more great interviews. Bye-bye.